The leader of an Arab group noticed bruises on the black cook. What happened next? The plate fell to the floor with a crash that silenced the entire restaurant. Shards of porcelain scattered across the floor as Grace stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the red sauce dripping between the fragments. Her hands were shaking visibly, and for a brief second, her uniform sleeve rode up, revealing what she was desperately trying to hide, a dark purple mark that ran up her wrist. Incompetent. Mr. Mitchell's voice cut through the air like a whip. The manager of the Riverside Grill strode forward, his face red with anger. This will come out of your paycheck. Do you think plates grow on trees? Grace was 28 years old and had worked at that elegant restaurant in Charleston for almost 3 years. She was one of the few black employees in an establishment that catered to the city's elite. She quickly bent down to pick up the shards, keeping her head down, her shoulders hunched in a posture that had become second nature to her. "I'm sorry, sir," she murmured, her voice barely audible. At table 7, near the window, 4 men watched the scene in silence. Faisal al-Nasser, 35, was impossible to ignore. Tall with a neatly trimmed beard and piercing eyes, he wore a traditional white tunic under a modern tailored coat. At his side, his 3 companions were dressed in elegant clothes, all carrying the same serene and attentive presence. Faisal hadn't taken his eyes off Grace since the plate fell. He saw what the other customers chose to ignore, the way she flinched even before Mitchell shouted, as if she already expected the aggression. He saw the marks on her wrist. He saw the fear in her eyes. And most of all, he saw something he knew all too well. "Kareem," he said in Arabic to the man on his right, "are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Kareem, his cousin, nodded gravely. "The marks. The fear. It's like Yasmin," Faisal finished, his voice heavy with old pain. Yasmin was his younger sister. Had been. 7 years ago, she had died in an accidental fall in her own home. Everyone knew the truth that her abusive husband was hiding, but no one had spoken up loud enough, fast enough. By the time they finally intervened, it was too late. Since then, Faisal had carried the guilt of remaining silent when there was still time. The Al-Nasser Community Group was not just an Arab cultural center in Charleston. Under Faisal's leadership, it had become a refuge for anyone in need: immigrants, women fleeing violence, aimless youth. They operated discreetly but efficiently, helping those who needed it most. Mitchell finished humiliating Grace and returned to his office, not without making one last comment: "And cover those arms properly. This isn't the ghetto. Customers don't want to see your marks." Grace bit her lip hard. She gathered up the last few shards and walked back to the kitchen. As she passed Faisal's desk, their eyes met for a fraction of a second. In that brief moment, she saw something unexpected: genuine understanding from someone who knows the pain of others because he has experienced it himself. In the kitchen, Grace leaned against the steel sink and took 3 deep breaths. A technique to control panic attacks. She looked at her own hands that created wonderful dishes, but trembled uncontrollably whenever Mitchell raised his voice. What Grace didn't know was that brief glance would completely change her life. Because Faisal al-Nasser wasn't the kind of man who saw injustice and moved on. He carried ghosts from his past and had sworn never again to let his silence cost a life. As he finished his meal, Faisal watched every interaction in the restaurant. He saw how everyone cringed when Mitchell walked by. How they avoided eye contact. How Grace carried the weight of the world on her hunched shoulders. "Let's come back tomorrow," he said to his companions. "And the day after that. I need to understand what's going on here." "And then what?" asked Kareem. Faisal took a sip of tea, his eyes still fixed on the kitchen door. "Then we'll do what no one did for Yasmin. We'll break the silence." If you're wondering how a chance encounter in a restaurant could spark a battle that would expose Charleston's darkest secrets, stay tuned. Because sometimes justice comes at the hands of those who have lost too much to remain silent. Subscribe to the channel to find out how the courage of a stranger and the resilience of a broken woman will become a force that no abuser could ignore. Over the next 2 weeks, Faisal and his companions became regulars at the Riverside Grill. Always at the same table, always watching, always ordering the dishes Grace prepared. Mitchell noticed their frequent visits and, with his keen business instinct, began treating them with a false cordiality that fooled no one. "Arab gentlemen with money," he commented to the hostess one afternoon. "Keep them happy. People like that attract more people like that." What Mitchell didn't realize was that each visit was a silent investigation. Faisal mentally noted every shout from the kitchen, every time Grace cringed, every racist comment disguised as a joke. Kareem, who worked in technology, began discreetly researching Mitchell's background. "I found something," he said one evening, gathered at the community center. The laptop screen showed old newspaper articles. 3 previous restaurants. 2 harassment lawsuits that were settled confidentially. A former employee who dropped her complaint after receiving threats. "He has a pattern," Faisal muttered, his jaw tense. "And he knows how to silence his victims." It was Nadia, a volunteer lawyer with the group, who came up with the idea. "We need concrete evidence. Testimonies, recordings, documentation. Something he can't buy or threaten to make disappear." But how to approach Grace without scaring her off? The answer came unexpectedly. On a rainy Thursday, Faisal was leaving the restaurant when he saw Grace at the bus stop, soaked and shivering from the cold. Her umbrella had been blown inside out by the wind. He pulled his car up beside her. "Need a ride?" Grace instinctively backed away. "No, thank you. The bus is coming." "You're soaked. Please, it's not safe to wait here in the dark." He kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, his voice calm. "Just to your house. No strings attached." Something in his eyes, perhaps the same recognition she had seen weeks ago, made Grace accept. During the 15-minute drive to her modest apartment, they spoke little. But as she was getting out, Faisal said softly, "I know you don't know me. But if you ever need help, any kind of help, look for the Al Nasser Community Group on Broad Street. No questions asked, no judgments. Just help." Grace nodded, her eyes watering. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I lost someone by staying quiet for too long," he replied with brutal honesty. "And I swore never to make the same mistake again." 2 days later, Grace showed up at the community center. She had a black eye poorly concealed by makeup. "It's not Mitchell," she said before they asked, sitting in a cozy room with Faisal and Nadia. "It's my boyfriend, Devon. Mitchell just makes everything worse. He knows I desperately need this job, so he treats me like trash. And Devon gets worse when I'm stressed." "How long has this been going on?" Nadia asked gently. "Devon? 2 years. Mitchell? Since I started there." Grace looked at her hands. "I've tried to leave before. Devon found me. He said if I left him, he would make me regret it." Faisal and Nadia exchanged glances. This was more complex than they had imagined. "We have resources," Faisal said. "Safe shelter, lawyers, restraining orders. But I need you to understand, if we go down this road, we go all the way. Both Devon and Mitchell will be held accountable." "Mitchell hasn't done anything illegal," Grace murmured. "He's just cruel." "Systematic cruelty at work has a name," Nadia interjected. "Moral harassment. Hostile work environment. And if we can prove a pattern of behavior, we can destroy his reputation the same way he destroys his victims." Grace was silent for a long moment. Then something changed in her face. A spark of long-suppressed anger began to shine. "What do I need to do?" Over the next 2 weeks, Grace became a spy in her own workplace. With a small recorder hidden in her uniform, provided by Kareem, she documented every insult from Mitchell, every racist comment, every veiled threat. Nadia instructed her on how to note dates, times, and witnesses. Meanwhile, Faisal mobilized the community. He spoke discreetly with former restaurant employees. 3 women agreed to testify. One of them had medical records of work-related post-traumatic stress. Mitchell, completely oblivious, continued his reign of terror. One afternoon, he yelled at Grace in front of customers, "You incompetent. People like you should be thankful they have a job in a decent place." Grace kept her head down. But the recorder captured every word. That evening, at the community center, she handed over the latest recording. Faisal listened, his face hardening with every second. "We have enough," said Nadia, reviewing the notes. "We can file a lawsuit and we will win." "No," Grace surprised everyone. "I want more. I want everyone to know who he really is. I don't just want legal justice. I want public justice." Faisal smiled for the first time in weeks. There was the woman he knew existed beneath all that fear. Then we'll give him exactly that. What Mitchell didn't know was that his arrogance had sealed his fate, and that the woman he trampled on daily was about to become his worst nightmare. The plan was audacious and required perfect timing. Faisal knew that exposing Mitchell legally alone would not be enough. Men like him always found ways to wriggle out of it, make deals, start over somewhere else. No. This time, the fall would be public, irreversible, and devastating. The opportunity came when Mitchell proudly announced that the Riverside Grill would host the Charleston Chamber of Commerce's annual dinner. 200 businesspeople, local politicians, and journalists. Live coverage on social media. The night Mitchell planned to cement his reputation as a respectable businessman. "This is our chance," said Grace, her eyes shining with a determination that no one would have imagined existed in her weeks ago. "He'll want everything to be perfect. He'll be in the spotlight." Kareem worked his technological magic. He discreetly hacked into the restaurant sound system and installed a program that could be activated remotely. Nadia prepared all the legal documentation, lawsuits ready to be filed, copies of authenticated recordings, notarized testimonies from former employees. On the night of the event, Grace arrived at work as usual. Mitchell was especially unbearable, shouting contradictory orders, blaming everyone for his own mistakes. But for the first time, Grace didn't flinch. She smiled inwardly, knowing what was coming. At 8 p.m., the hall was packed. The mayor was giving a speech on community values and business excellence. Mitchell, in a rented tuxedo, was circling the tables like a peacock, receiving compliments and pats on the back. That's when his cell phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to talk to you urgently about your restaurant. I'm at the service entrance." Irritated but curious, Mitchell left through the back door. At the door, Faisal was waiting for him, arms crossed, accompanied by Kareem and 2 other members of the group. "What the hell do you want?" "I'm in the middle of an important event." "I know," Faisal said calmly. "I came personally to warn you before your life falls apart in the next 5 minutes." Mitchell laughed contemptuously. "Threatening me? You fucking Arab, you think you scare me? I'm calling the police right now and—" "Would you call Chief Morrison?" Faisal interrupted. "He's inside. So are Judge Thompson, District Attorney Davis, and 3 investigative journalists. All about to find out who you really are." Mitchell's face paled. "What are you talking about?" "Grace has worked for you for 3 years. During that time, you subjected her to systematic bullying, racist comments, veiled threats, and constant psychological abuse. We have 47 recordings of you. Testimony from 6 former employees. Medical records. And evidence that you paid 2 women to keep quiet about sexual harassment." You can't prove anything," Mitchell stammered, but panic already dominated his eyes. "We already have," Kareem showed a tablet. "Everything is in this dossier. Copies have already been sent to the Department of Justice, the Labor Rights Commission, and 3 newspapers. But the best part," he smiled, "the best part is happening right now inside." Inside the hall, the sound system suddenly interrupted the background music. Mitchell's voice began to echo through the speakers. "You incompetent woman. People like you should be thankful you have a decent job." Followed by another clip. "Stupid black woman, you're only good for washing dishes." And another, "If you complain, I guarantee you'll never work in Charleston again." The silence in the hall was deafening. All faces turned toward the speakers in horror. The recordings continued, one after another, each insult more repugnant than the last. Mitchell tried to run back inside, but Faisal blocked his way. "We're not done yet. There's one more person you need to hear." Grace's voice echoed through the system. "My name is Grace Williams. I worked here for 3 years. Every day, Mr. Mitchell humiliated me, cursed at me, and treated me like I was less than human. I put up with it because I needed the job, because I was afraid, because I thought no one would care. But I was wrong." Inside the hall, Grace climbed onto the small stage. Her hands were no longer shaking. "I am here today thanks to people who cared when I thought no one would. This man destroyed my self-esteem, my mental health, and almost destroyed my life. But he won't destroy anyone else." The journalists' cameras were already recording. Flashes exploded. The mayor stood up, visibly shocked. Judge Thompson was already on the phone. Outside, Mitchell fell to his knees. No. No. My restaurant, my reputation. They're gone, Faisal said emotionlessly. The Labor Department already has an order to investigate. The Riverside Grill will be shut down tomorrow. Your name is in all the online newspapers right now. And the two women you paid to keep quiet? They saw the news and decided to speak up too. You've destroyed me. Mitchell was crying now, the mask of a respectable businessman completely shattered. No, Faisal bent down to his level. You destroyed yourself. We just made sure everyone saw who you've always been. Inside the hall, Grace was surrounded by people offering support. The owner of another restaurant had already offered her a job. 2 lawyers volunteered to represent her for free. And on social media, the hashtag Justice for Grace was already trending. Mitchell was escorted away by police half an hour later, not for arrest, but for protection. The crowd outside had turned hostile. His empire of cruelty had crumbled in a single night. And Grace, for the first time in years, took a deep breath without feeling the weight of fear crushing her chest. 6 months later, Grace was unrecognizable. Not physically, she still had the same gentle smile and expressive eyes, but the energy she radiated was completely different. Her shoulders were no longer hunched. Her voice was no longer a whisper. And when she walked the streets of Charleston, her head was held high. The Riverside Grill never reopened. After the Labor Department's investigation, so many violations were uncovered: delayed wages, hostile work environment, systematic racial discrimination, that Mitchell not only lost the restaurant, but also faced civil lawsuits from 11 former employees. His name became synonymous with abuse and prejudice in Charleston. No bank would finance him, no supplier would work with him, and he ended up leaving town in disgrace, bankrupt and alone. I heard he's working at a gas station somewhere out in the country, Kareem commented one afternoon as they drank tea at the community center. I don't care where he is, Grace replied, and she really didn't care. Mitchell no longer occupied her mind. She had much more important things to focus on. Grace's story went viral nationwide. Not just as another case of workplace abuse, but as a powerful example of how communities can come together to protect the vulnerable. The Al Nasser Community Group received donations from across the country. 3 new similar organizations were created in other cities, inspired by Faisal's model. But the biggest transformation was in Grace. With Nadia's support, she not only sued Mitchell, she also finally found the courage to report Devon. The restraining order was granted, and he was arrested after violating its terms. For the first time in 2 years, Grace slept without fear of waking up to screams or punches. Ms. Patricia Chun, owner of the renowned Golden Lotus restaurant, offered Grace not just a job, but a partnership. I've tasted your food, she said. You're too talented to just work in someone else's kitchen. How about we open a second restaurant together? You as the executive chef. Grace cried when she signed the contract. At 29, she would be the co-owner and chef of her own establishment. The restaurant, which would open in 3 months, would be called Resilience. On a hot September afternoon, during the inauguration of what would be the new restaurant, Grace asked to speak. Faisal was there, as were Kareem, Nadia, and dozens of community members who had supported her journey. A year ago, Grace began, her voice firm and clear, I was a broken woman. I woke up every day thinking that pain was all I deserved. That there was no way out. That no one would care if I just disappeared. She paused, her eyes meeting Faisal's. But then a stranger, someone who owed me nothing, decided that my silence mattered more than his convenience. And that changed everything. Faisal nodded, moved. He thought of Yasmin. For the first time in 7 years, the guilt he carried felt a little lighter. He couldn't save his sister, but he honored her memory by saving someone else. I learned something fundamental, Grace continued. Revenge isn't about destroying those who hurt you. It's about rebuilding yourself so strong that their power over you simply ceases to exist. Mitchell treated me like trash for years, but today I have my own restaurant, my own voice, and my own story. He has nothing. And that is true justice. In the months that followed, Grace became an active voice against workplace abuse. She gave lectures, wrote articles, and helped other women find the courage to speak out. The Resilience restaurant became more than a place to eat. It was a symbol of overcoming adversity, a space where part of the profits went to organizations that supported victims of domestic violence and discrimination. Faisal and Grace developed a deep and respectful friendship. Nothing romantic, they both understood that what they shared was more important than that, a connection forged in the fire of shared pain and justice achieved. He visited Resilience weekly, always bringing members of the Arab community with him, helping to build bridges between cultures in a city that still had much to learn about acceptance. "You saved my life," Grace told him at one of those dinners. "No," Faisal replied sincerely. "I just refused to remain silent. You saved your own life when you decided you deserved better." A year after Mitchell's fall, Grace was on stage at TEDx Charleston, telling her story to an audience of over 1,000 people. "If there's one lesson I want to leave you with," she concluded, "it's this: your silence never protects you, it only protects those who hurt you. And when you find your voice, no matter how long it takes, use it. Because your story may be the light someone needs to find their way in the darkness." The audience rose to their feet in ovation. At the back of the auditorium, Faisal applauded with tears in his eyes, whispering a prayer in Arabic for Yasmin. His sister was no longer here, but her legacy lived on in every life he helped transform. Mitchell tried to sue Grace for defamation months later, but the case was summarily dismissed. All the recordings were authentic, all the testimonies verified. He spent his last savings on lawyers who could do nothing. The truth, when documented and exposed with courage, is indefensible. Grace never trembled again when she heard someone raise their voice. She never hunched her shoulders again. And every time a customer praised a dish at Resilience, she smiled with genuine pride, not just for the food, but for becoming the chef of her own life. The best revenge was not to destroy Mitchell. It was to build something so beautiful, so meaningful, and so powerful that his cruelty became irrelevant. It was proving that people who are underestimated, trampled on, and silenced can not only survive, they can thrive in ways their oppressors never will. And in a city that had once been the scene of her humiliation, Grace now walked like a queen. Not out of arrogance, but out of a simple and profound certainty that she deserved respect. And that certainty, once achieved, no one could ever take away from her. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to regain their voice and dignity. Because sometimes, the greatest revolution begins with a single person deciding that they will no longer accept crumbs when they deserve the full banquet.